My name is April, and at 32 years old, I never imagined I would be fired during a live quarterly earnings call. After 5 years of loyalty to growth scale, watching for warning signs but pushing forward anyway, I discovered something that would change everything. What my former employers did not realize was that I had uncovered critical information about their $210 million acquisition. They laughed while firing me, not knowing I had prepared one email attachment that would bring everything crashing down. Before I dive into how I took down a $210 million deal with a single email attachment, leave a comment telling me where you're watching from, and don't forget to subscribe if you want more corporate revenge. Stories. I graduated with my MBA from Cornell University 6 years ago, bright-eyed and full of ambition. My professors always told me I had a sharp eye for details, which is probably why I was recruited heavily by several companies. Growth Scale, a rising star in the fintech industry, caught my attention with their innovative approach to financial data management and their seemingly progressive corporate culture. Their CEO, Richard Bennett, was featured in Business Insider as one of the top 40 under 40 visionaries transforming the financial technology landscape. His vision of creating accessible financial tools for small businesses resonated with me, and I accepted their offer without hesitation. When I joined Growth Scale, they were still relatively small, about 80 employees working in an open office space in downtown Chicago. Richard would walk around coffee in hand, chatting with everyone from developers to administrative staff. The COO, Thomas Wright, was more reserved but equally approachable. He had a background in traditional banking, but had jumped to the startup world, seeking more innovation. Stephanie Mills, the VP of Finance, initially impressed me with her sharp mind and strategic thinking. The company grew rapidly during my first 2 years. We expanded from 80 to over 300 employees, moved to a gleaming office tower with panoramic views of Lake Michigan, and our valuation increased sixfold after 2 successful funding rounds. I climbed the ranks, quickly moving from compliance analyst to senior compliance officer by my 3rd year. My team grew from just me to a department of 6 professionals responsible for ensuring our financial operations met all regulatory requirements. Looking back, the warning signs were there even in those early days. As we grew, the once collaborative atmosphere began to shift. Richard appeared in the office less frequently. Town halls became quarterly rather than monthly. Thomas started sending representatives to meetings he once attended personally. But the most noticeable change was in Stephanie. Her friendly demeanor transformed into something harder, more calculating. She began pushing aggressive growth targets and questioning any department that raised potential risks or compliance issues. My role as senior compliance officer meant I oversaw risk management procedures and ensured our financial reporting adhered to all applicable laws and regulations. I had access to sensitive information and was responsible for flagging potential issues before they became problems. My team and I created monitoring systems to track unusual financial patterns and developed protocols for investigating concerns. I took pride in maintaining the integrity of our operations, even as the pressure to move faster and worry less about regulatory details increased. The first major red flag appeared during a routine quarterly compliance review. I noticed discrepancies in how certain revenue streams were being categorized. When I brought this to Stephanie's attention, she dismissed it as accounting flexibility and suggested I focus on bigger picture issues. I documented my concerns anyway, a habit that would eventually save me and cost Growth Scale dearly. In the spring of last year, Richard announced during an all-hands meeting that Growth Scale was pursuing an acquisition of Dataflex, our biggest competitor in the small business financial analytics space. The price tag was staggering, $210 million, nearly half our company's valuation. Richard promised this acquisition would cement our position as the undisputed market leader and accelerate our growth trajectory exponentially. The announcement was met with excitement throughout the company. Stock options would increase in value, our market position would be stronger, and the growth opportunities seemed limitless. I was assigned to the due diligence team alongside representatives from finance, legal, and technology. Our job was to thoroughly examine Dataflex's operations financials and technical infrastructure before finalizing the deal. Little did I know this assignment would ultimately lead to one of the most challenging and vindicating moments of my career. The due diligence process began with a mountain of documents from Dataflex. Their financial statements, client contracts, employment agreements, and technical documentation filled our secure data room. As part of the compliance team, my primary focus was on their financial reporting practices and regulatory compliance history. I had done this type of work before, but something about this particular acquisition felt different from the beginning. 3 weeks into reviewing Dataflex's financial statements, I noticed odd patterns in their revenue recognition practices. They had reported consecutive quarters of 20% growth, which aligned perfectly with the projections they had provided to investors. Too perfectly, in fact. Any company with genuine growth shows variability quarter over quarter, but Dataflex's numbers seemed suspiciously consistent. I also discovered unusual timing in how they recognized revenue from long-term contracts. Rather than spreading the revenue over the life of the contract, as required by accounting standards, they appeared to be front-loading significant portions. This could artificially inflate current financial performance while creating hidden liabilities for the future. My first step was consulting with Lawrence Parker, the external auditor from Montgomery Financial Services, who was working with us on the acquisition. Lawrence was in his late 50s with salt and pepper hair and reading glasses that perpetually sat on the end of his nose. His reputation for thoroughness and integrity was well known in financial circles. "These patterns are certainly unusual," Lawrence said, during our first private meeting about my concerns. "The consistency alone raises questions. Companies simply do not grow at exactly 20% every quarter naturally." Armed with Lawrence's validation, I brought my findings to Janet Coleman, my direct supervisor, and the VP of Regulatory Compliance. Janet had been with GrowthScale almost from the beginning and had always supported thorough investigations in the past. I expected her to authorize a deeper dive into Dataflex's financials. Instead, her response left me stunned. "April, I think you're being too thorough here. Richard wants this deal closed by the end of the quarter." These kinds of accounting differences are common in acquisitions and can be sorted out post-merger. She barely glanced at the detailed analysis I had prepared. "But Janet, if these discrepancies indicate systematic misrepresentation, we could be inheriting serious regulatory issues and potential liabilities," I countered. Janet sighed and removed her glasses. "Look, everyone at the executive level is aware that Dataflex has been aggressive with their accounting. It is priced into the deal. Your job is to flag the issues which you have done, and then let the executives decide how to proceed." I left Janet's office unsettled. This was not how compliance was supposed to work. We weren't just boxes to check, but a critical function to protect the company from risk. That evening, I confided in Rachel Wilson, a senior financial analyst who had become a friend over years of working together. "This doesn't sound right," Rachel said, as we shared takeout dinner in my office after hours. "If they know there are issues but are proceeding anyway, that could spell trouble for everyone involved." Exactly. And if these practices are widespread enough, they could significantly impact Dataflex's actual value, I replied. Rachel lowered her voice, even though we were alone. "Just be careful, April. Stephanie has been pushing this acquisition hard. I have heard her tell the financial team to focus on synergies and growth potential rather than historical accounting minutiae." I spent the next 2 weeks meticulously documenting everything I found. Each discrepancy, unusual pattern, and potential regulatory violation went into a comprehensive spreadsheet with supporting evidence. I added sections analyzing the potential financial impact and the regulatory risks involved. This document, which would later become the infamous attachment, grew to over 30 pages of detailed analysis. Meanwhile, the pressure to complete the due diligence phase intensified. Stephanie Mills began requesting daily updates from all teams involved. During one particularly tense meeting, she singled me out. "April, I understand you have some concerns about Dataflex's accounting practices," she said with a tight smile that did not reach her eyes. "But we need to maintain momentum. This deal is transformative for GrowthScale." "I am just doing my job," I replied calmly. "There are serious questions about how Dataflex has reported their financials, that could affect both the valuation and our regulatory standing post-acquisition. Stephanie's smile vanished. Your job is to support this company's growth, not create obstacles. Perhaps you should consider whether your talents are properly aligned with GrowthScale's vision for the future. The threat was thinly veiled, but unmistakable. As the meeting ended, several colleagues avoided eye contact with me. The message was clear: questioning the Dataflex acquisition could be career suicide. After Stephanie's veiled threat, I knew I needed to be strategic. If my concerns were going to be taken seriously, I would need irrefutable evidence and possibly allies outside my direct reporting line. I decided to reach out to Lawrence Parker again, this time through personal email rather than company channels. Can we meet off-site to discuss the Dataflex acquisition? I wrote. I have additional concerns that require a confidential conversation. Lawrence agreed, and we met at a quiet cafe 3 blocks from the office the following morning. I arrived early and chose a table in the back corner, where we were unlikely to be overheard or seen by colleagues. I appreciate your discretion, I said, after Lawrence arrived. I have found more concerning patterns in Dataflex's financials, and my supervisor has explicitly discouraged further investigation. Lawrence frowned. That is troubling. As the external auditor, I have an obligation to ensure full transparency and compliance. What specifically have you discovered? I showed Lawrence my personal laptop with additional findings. Dataflex had been recognizing revenue from contracts that contained contingency clauses that might never be fulfilled. They had also been capitalizing costs that should have been expensed, artificially inflating their profitability. Most concerning, I had identified circular transactions with smaller companies where Dataflex appeared to be creating revenue through complex back-and-forth arrangements with no real economic substance. This goes beyond aggressive accounting, Lawrence said gravely. Some of these practices potentially cross into fraudulent territory. Have you documented everything thoroughly? Yes, but I am concerned about keeping this documentation on company servers, given the pushback I have received. Lawrence nodded thoughtfully. Forward your documentation to my secure email. As the auditor, I have independent obligations to investigate material concerns regardless of management pressure. Over the next 3 weeks, Lawrence and I conducted a shadow investigation. We communicated through personal channels and met outside the office to share findings. Lawrence leveraged his position as auditor to request additional documentation from Dataflex that would normally have been filtered through our finance team. What we uncovered was worse than I initially suspected. Dataflex had systematically misrepresented their financial position for at least the past 2 years. Their actual growth rate was closer to 8%, not 20%, and their reported profitability was inflated by approximately 40% through various accounting manipulations. The stress of maintaining my normal work responsibilities while conducting this secret investigation began to take a toll. I started experiencing insomnia and anxiety attacks. My boyfriend Justin noticed the change immediately. You were up until 2 in the morning again, he said one Saturday, as we sat on our apartment balcony. This acquisition is consuming you. I sighed, staring at the city skyline. If what I have discovered is accurate, GrowthScale is about to spend over $200 million on a company built on financial deception. I cannot just look the other way. I know you cannot. That is not who you are, Justin said, squeezing my hand. But I worry about what this is doing to you, and what might happen if you keep pushing against executives who clearly do not want to hear it. Justin's concerns were valid. I had lost 5 pounds in 2 weeks, and dark circles had taken up permanent residence under my eyes. But stopping was not an option. Each new discovery reinforced the seriousness of the situation. I spent countless late nights in my home office, compiling evidence and organizing it into a comprehensive report. I created sections detailing each problematic practice, the relevant accounting rules being violated, and estimates of the financial impact. I added an executive summary that plainly stated the bottom line. Dataflex's reported financials significantly misrepresented the company's actual performance and value. By early August, my report had grown to 48 pages of detailed analysis, with another 30 pages of supporting documentation. It represented hundreds of hours of work and contained evidence that could not be easily dismissed. I decided it was time to make a second attempt to alert GrowthScale's leadership, this time bypassing Janet and going directly to Thomas Wright, the COO. "I appreciate you bringing this to me directly," Thomas said, when I met with him in his corner office. He glanced at the executive summary I had provided, but did not open the full report sitting on his desk. Acquisitions of this magnitude always involve some financial complexities. "This goes well beyond normal complexities," I insisted. "The patterns suggest intentional misrepresentation that could constitute fraud. If we complete this acquisition without addressing these issues, GrowthScale could face significant regulatory penalties and shareholder lawsuits." Thomas leaned back in his chair, studying me with an expression I could not quite read. "April, you are clearly dedicated to your role, which is commendable. But business at this level requires a certain flexibility and perspective. The potential strategic value of this acquisition outweighs historical accounting discrepancies. With respect, sir, fraud is not a discrepancy. It is a crime." Thomas's expression hardened. "That is a serious accusation that I would advise against making broadly. The executive team and board have reviewed the acquisition thoroughly and are satisfied with the due diligence process. Your concerns have been noted." As I left Thomas's office, a chilling realization settled over me. This wasn't a case of executives missing important information. They knew about the issues with Dataflex's financials, but were proceeding with the acquisition anyway. Perhaps they believed they could manage the regulatory risks, or that the strategic benefits outweighed the legal exposure. Whatever their reasoning, I had just positioned myself as an obstacle to their plans. 2 days after my meeting with Thomas, I noticed something odd. My security badge no longer granted me access to the executive floor. When I inquired with building security, they informed me the change had been authorized by Stephanie Mills's office. The message was clear: my access was being restricted. That same week, I received a calendar invitation for the upcoming quarterly earnings call, which struck me as unusual. While I occasionally prepared compliance statements for these calls, I had never been asked to attend the live session with investors. The invitation came directly from Stephanie's assistant, with no explanation. It felt ominous, but I couldn't pinpoint why. My suspicions deepened when I overheard a conversation between Janet and Stephanie while passing by a conference room with the door slightly ajar. "The restructuring of the compliance department needs to happen before the Dataflex closing," Stephanie was saying. "We can't have unnecessary complications at the final stage." "I understand," Janet replied. "And April?" "That's being handled separately," Stephanie responded. "Richard agrees it's necessary given her perspective on the acquisition." I quickened my pace before they could notice me, my heart pounding. They were planning something, and it clearly involved eliminating my role. The betrayal stung, especially from Janet, who had once been a mentor. Over the next week, the isolation became more pronounced. Colleagues who previously collaborated closely with me suddenly became distant. Meetings about the Dataflex acquisition were rescheduled when I was unavailable, or worse, not included on the invitation at all. My team members began receiving directions directly from Janet, bypassing my authority. When I attempted to access certain acquisition documents I had previously reviewed, I discovered my permissions had been revoked. The system displayed an error message: "Access restricted. Contact your administrator for assistance." I scheduled a meeting with Janet to address these changes directly. She kept me waiting for 20 minutes before finally appearing at her office door. "Sorry, April, but I need to reschedule. Something urgent has come up with the Dataflex team," she said without meeting my eyes. "Janet, my system access has been restricted, and I'm being excluded from acquisition meetings that directly involve compliance oversight." "What's going on?" Janet glanced nervously down the hallway. "Look, April, maybe it's time to stop making waves. The acquisition is moving forward whether you're comfortable with it or not. Sometimes in corporate environments you need to pick your battles. Financial fraud isn't a battle I'm picking. It's a serious legal issue that could have consequences for everyone involved," I insisted. That's exactly the kind of talk that's causing problems, Janet hissed suddenly, looking directly at me. Just dial it back. Okay. For your own sake. She turned and walked away, leaving me standing alone in the hallway. That evening I called Lawrence Parker from my personal phone. They're isolating me at work, I explained after we exchanged greetings. Restricting my access, excluding me from meetings, and my direct supervisor basically warned me to keep quiet, for my own sake. This confirms they're aware of the issues and proceeding anyway, Lawrence said. April, you should know that I've escalated my concerns to the partner level at my firm. We have our own professional obligations regarding potential fraud. What does that mean, practically? It means we're preparing to issue formal inquiries that GrowthScale and Dataflex will be legally required to address. But these processes take time, and it seems your situation is deteriorating rapidly. There's something else, I added. During my review, I found a clause in the acquisition contract about representations and warranties. It states that if either party is found to have materially misrepresented their financial condition, the deal can be voided even after closing, and the $210 million escrow would be returned to GrowthScale. That's standard language in acquisitions of this size, Lawrence confirmed, but it would require proof of fraudulent representations and typically action by the board or shareholders. The evidence we've compiled would satisfy that requirement, wouldn't it? There was a pause on the line. Yes, I believe it would. Are you thinking what I think you're thinking? I took a deep breath. I'm compiling everything into a final comprehensive report. If they're planning to push me out before I can raise these issues through proper channels, I need to ensure the information doesn't disappear with me. After our call, I worked through the night organizing all our findings into a single devastating document. I included excerpts from Dataflex's financial statements alongside the evidence of misrepresentation. I referenced relevant accounting standards, regulatory requirements, and sections of the acquisition agreement that would be violated. I concluded with a section outlining the legal implications for GrowthScale, its executives, and its board, if they proceeded with the acquisition knowing these facts. The next morning I encrypted the document and saved it to my personal drive, naming it simply Dataflex, Findings, Final, PDF. As I prepared for work, I felt a strange calm, despite the storm I knew was coming. My professional integrity and personal values were being tested in ways I never anticipated, but the path forward was becoming increasingly clear. I had always believed in doing the right thing, even when difficult. Now that principle would be put to the ultimate test. I carefully selected my outfit that morning, a charcoal gray suit that projected confidence and professionalism. If they were planning to push me out, I would not give them the satisfaction of seeing me appear defeated. I also prepared a separate email with my findings attached, addressed to the board of directors, key investors, and our external auditors, but did not send it. This was my nuclear option, ready to deploy if necessary. As I drove to the office, I wondered if my career at GrowthScale would survive the day. What I didn't yet realize was that by the day's end it wouldn't be just my career in jeopardy, but the entire $210 million acquisition and perhaps the company itself. The morning of the quarterly earnings call arrived with an atmosphere of tension throughout the office. The executive suite was bustling with activity as the finance team made final preparations for the call that would announce both our quarterly results and provide an update on the Dataflex acquisition. I arrived early wearing the charcoal gray suit I had carefully selected the night before. My calendar showed the earnings call scheduled for 9:00 a.m. in the main conference room, the one with gleaming wood panels and floor-to-ceiling windows overlooking the Chicago skyline. This room was typically reserved for board meetings and major client presentations. As I approached, I noticed unusual security presence outside the doors. Inside, the technical team was setting up the conference call system and preparing presentation slides. Richard Bennett stood at the head of the table in animated conversation with Stephanie Mills. They both fell silent when I entered. Richard's expression was unreadable, but Stephanie's held a hint of something that made my stomach tighten. Was it satisfaction? Anticipation? April, good morning, Richard said with forced casualness. Thanks for joining us today. Of course, I replied, maintaining a professional demeanor despite my growing unease, though I admit I was surprised to be included on the call invitation. We value having our senior compliance personnel present for important company communications. Stephanie interjected smoothly. Please take a seat over there. She gestured to a chair, near the far end of the table, away from where the executives would be seated. Over the next 30 minutes, the room filled with key personnel. Janet arrived but avoided making eye contact with me. Thomas Wright nodded curtly in my direction before engaging in hushed conversation with Richard. Lawrence Parker, representing our external auditors, arrived last and seemed surprised to see me. He gave me a subtle nod before taking his seat across the table. At precisely 9:00 a.m., the call began. Richard welcomed investors and analysts to the third quarter earnings call with practiced charisma. Before we dive into our financial results, I want to share some exciting news. As many of you know, we announced our intent to acquire Dataflex earlier this year. I'm pleased to report that we are in the final stages of this transformative acquisition, with closing expected by month's end. My heart raced as Richard continued to extol the virtues of the acquisition, describing synergies and growth projections that were based on financial data I knew to be fraudulent. I glanced at Lawrence, who maintained a carefully neutral expression. Stephanie took over to present the quarterly financials, highlighting revenue growth and expanding profit margins. Her presentation painted growth scale as a company on an unstoppable upward trajectory, with the Dataflex acquisition positioned as the crown jewel of our expansion strategy. With the addition of Dataflex's market-leading analytics platform and their impressive client portfolio, we project accelerated growth throughout next year and beyond, Stephanie concluded confidently. Now, before we open the floor to questions, we have one additional announcement. She paused and her gaze shifted directly to me. My pulse quickened as every eye in the room followed her line of sight. As part of our ongoing organizational optimization, we're making some changes to our compliance department structure. Stephanie continued, her voice taking on a performative quality that suggested she was enjoying the moment. April Thompson has been with GrowthScale for 5 years, and today will be her last day with the company. A shock ran through me like an electrical current. Despite suspecting something was coming, the public nature of the announcement caught me completely off guard. To be fired on a live call with investors, analysts, and the entire executive team present was not just unusual but humiliating. We thank April for her service, Stephanie added with a smile that didn't reach her eyes, and wish her well in her future endeavors. I sat frozen in my chair as confused murmurs rippled through the conference call. Being terminated was one thing. Having it announced on a quarterly earnings call was unprecedented and clearly designed to maximize my humiliation. Richard quickly attempted to move the conversation along. Now let's open the floor to questions about our quarterly results and the Dataflex acquisition. An analyst from Goldman Sachs asked about integration timelines. Another from J.P. Morgan inquired about potential regulatory hurdles. The conversation proceeded as if my career had not just been publicly terminated in front of the financial community. After several minutes of this surreal experience, I found my voice. "Excuse me," I said loud enough to cut through the ongoing discussion. The room fell silent, and all eyes turned to me again. "I'd like to clarify something about my termination, which I'm just learning about now, along with everyone on this call." Stephanie's smile faltered. "April, this isn't the appropriate forum for HR discussions. We can address transition details after the call." "Actually, I believe this is exactly the right forum," I replied, surprised by the steadiness in my voice, despite my racing heart. "Since you chose to announce my termination here, I think our investors deserve to know why a senior compliance officer is being removed just before the completion of a $210 million acquisition." Richard cleared his throat. "April, please. This is neither the time nor place. Is it because I identified serious irregularities in Dataflex's financial reporting that could constitute fraud?" I continued, ignoring Richard's attempt to silence me. "Or because I formally raised concerns about potential securities violations if this acquisition proceeds without proper disclosure of these issues?" The silence that followed was absolute. Even the breathing of those in the room seemed suspended. Then Stephanie laughed, the sound sharp and dismissive. April's termination is part of a planned restructuring, not related to any unfounded concerns she may have raised, Stephanie said, addressing the investors on the call rather than me. This is precisely why we're making this change. We need compliance personnel who understand the difference between routine accounting variances and serious issues. Her condescending tone and dismissive laughter ignited something in me. The weeks of isolation, the stress, the betrayal by colleagues I had trusted, all crystallized into a moment of absolute clarity. If they wanted to fire me in public, then I would respond in kind. I stood up, straightening to my full height. In that case, I'd like to formally resign effective immediately. My voice was calm but carried throughout the room. And before I go, I think everyone on this call should be aware that I will be sending one email with an attachment that deserves immediate attention. Richard's face paled visibly. This call is about our quarterly results, not personnel issues. Let's return to questions about our performance. One last thing, I said, looking directly at Lawrence Parker. The attachment will be sent to all board members, our external auditors, and the SEC Enforcement Division. I suggest everyone review it carefully before proceeding with the Dataflex acquisition. With that, I gathered my belongings and walked toward the door with as much dignity as I could muster. As I reached the exit, I heard Stephanie attempting to regain control of the call, her voice now lacking its earlier confidence. I stepped into the hallway, closed the door behind me, and leaned against the wall, my heart pounding, but my mind remarkably clear. I had just set in motion events that couldn't be undone. Now it was time to send the email that would change everything. The moment I left the conference room, I went straight to my office, closed the door, and sent the email I had prepared. With shaking fingers, I attached the comprehensive 48-page report documenting all the financial irregularities at Dataflex, the evidence of potential fraud, and the sections of the acquisition agreement that would be violated if this deal proceeded. I addressed it to all board members, the external audit team, key investors, and yes, the SEC Enforcement Division. The subject line read simply, Urgent Dataflex Acquisition Fraud Evidence. After hitting send, I sat back in my chair, experiencing a strange mixture of terror and relief. There was no going back now. I had just potentially triggered the collapse of a $210 million deal and possibly exposed myself to legal retaliation from GrowthScale. Yet I also felt an overwhelming sense that I had done the right thing, regardless of the personal consequences. My phone buzzed with a text message from Lawrence. Received your email. Stay where you are. Call getting chaotic. I could only imagine the scene unfolding in the conference room. Lawrence, with his impeccable reputation for integrity, would be reviewing my document, while executives scrambled to contain the situation. Investors on the call would be demanding explanations. The carefully choreographed narrative about the brilliant Dataflex acquisition would be unraveling in real time. 10 minutes later, my office phone rang. The display showed it was an internal call from the main conference room. I hesitated, then answered on speaker. April, this is Lawrence Parker. I've reviewed your documentation. His voice sounded strained but resolute. I need to confirm these financial discrepancies were formally reported to GrowthScale management prior to today. Yes, I replied clearly. I reported them to Janet Coleman initially, then directly to Thomas Wright 2 weeks ago. I have email confirmation of both meetings and notes documenting their responses. There was a pause. Then Lawrence asked the question that would define everything that followed. So the $210 million escrow is voided as of right now. Before I could respond, I heard Stephanie's voice in the background, sharp with panic. Cut her line. End this call immediately. There was a click, and the line went dead. But it was too late. Lawrence had asked the critical question on a recorded line with dozens of investors and analysts listening. The implications were clear to everyone. The acquisition contract had been violated, and the massive escrow payment could now be legally reclaimed. Within seconds, my cell phone exploded with notifications. First came texts from Rachel. What did you do? The call just went insane. Stephanie is livid. Richard looks like he might pass out. Thomas just stormed out. They ended the call abruptly, claiming technical difficulties. Then came the emails. First from HR requesting I leave the premises immediately. Next from legal demanding I preserve all documents related to Dataflex and threatening severe consequences for any breach of confidentiality obligations. Then from Janet, a surprisingly personal note. I never thought you would go this far. For what it's worth, I did try to warn you. I began packing my personal belongings, moving methodically, despite the adrenaline coursing through my system. Through my office window, I could see people gathered in small clusters throughout the floor, talking animatedly. Word was spreading fast. My phone rang again. It was Justin. April, are you okay? Rachel just called me saying something huge happened at work. She wouldn't give details, but said I should check on you immediately. I've been fired, I said, my voice surprisingly steady. Or, I resigned. Technically. It's complicated, but I'm okay. Can you meet me at home? I'm already on my way, Justin replied without hesitation. Whatever happened, we'll figure it out together. As I zipped my bag closed, Rachel appeared at my office door, slightly out of breath. She closed it behind her and spoke in a hushed tone. The stock is already dropping. Word is leaking out about potential accounting irregularities with the Dataflex deal. Stephanie is in damage control mode, but it's not working. Lawrence refused to continue the call without addressing your email. You should distance yourself from me, I warned her. They'll be looking for anyone who might have helped me. Rachel shook her head. I've watched them push you aside for doing your job. I'm not worried about being associated with integrity. She gave me a quick hug. Now go before security gets their marching orders to escort you out dramatically. I made my way to the elevator, acutely aware of the stares following me. Some colleagues looked confused, others sympathetic, a few openly hostile. The ride down to the lobby felt interminable. When the doors finally opened, I was surprised to see Lawrence Parker waiting. I thought you might appreciate a friendly face on your way out, he said, falling into step beside me. What you did took extraordinary courage. Or extraordinary foolishness, I replied. I probably just ended my career in finance. Lawrence shook his head. Don't be so sure. My firm is already initiating our formal fraud investigation protocols. If your findings are validated, which I strongly suspect they will be, you'll be viewed as a whistleblower who prevented a massive corporate fraud, not as a troublemaker. As we reached the building exit, Lawrence handed me his personal business card. Call me tomorrow. There will be investigations, and you'll need proper representation and support. I nodded gratefully and stepped outside into the bright morning sunlight. It was only 10:30 a.m., yet it felt like days had passed since I entered the building that morning. My phone buzzed again with a news alert. Growth scale GRSC shares down 12% on unexpected announcement delay and executive shakeup. This was just the beginning. As I hailed a taxi, I realized that the document I had spent weeks creating was now being read by dozens of influential people in the financial world. By the end of the day, the repercussions would be impossible to contain. For better or worse, I had changed the trajectory of not just my career, but potentially an entire company. As the taxi pulled away from the curb, I looked back at the gleaming tower that had been my professional home for 5 years. I had arrived that morning as a senior compliance officer and was leaving as, what exactly, whistleblower, target, hero, pariah? Only time would tell which label would stick. The days following my dramatic exit from Growth Scale were a whirlwind. Justin was my rock, maintaining a calm presence as my phone continuously lit up with calls and messages from journalists, former colleagues, and eventually attorneys from multiple regulatory agencies. 3 days after the earnings call incident, I received a call from Barbara Sullivan, an enforcement attorney with the Securities and Exchange Commission. Miss Thompson, we've reviewed the documentation you provided regarding Dataflex's financial reporting practices. We'd like to schedule a formal interview as soon as possible. That first meeting with the SEC lasted 7 hours. I walked them through every discrepancy I had found, every conversation I had with growth-scale executives, and every attempt I had made to address the issues internally before taking more drastic action. The investigators were particularly interested in the responses from Janet Thomas and Stephanie when I raised concerns. So, to clarify, one investigator asked you directly inform the Chief Operating Officer that you believed Dataflex's financial statements contained potentially fraudulent misrepresentations, and he acknowledged this, but indicated the acquisition would proceed regardless. Yes, I confirmed. He said, the strategic value outweighed historical accounting discrepancies, which I took as confirmation. They were aware of the issues, but had decided they weren't material enough to halt the deal. That's extremely significant, the investigator noted, exchanging glances with his colleagues. Meanwhile, the business media had caught wind of the story. The Wall Street Journal ran a front-page article titled, "Compliance Officer's Last Stand: How One Woman Halted a $210 million Acquisition." CNBC featured segments analyzing the potential securities law violations and what they might mean for growth-scale's leadership. My LinkedIn profile suddenly received thousands of views and connection requests. Lawrence Parker called me regularly with updates from inside growth-scale. The Dataflex deal is officially suspended pending a comprehensive forensic accounting review, he informed me 1 week after the incident. My firm has expanded our investigation scope, and preliminary findings support virtually all of your allegations. 2 weeks later, the other shoe dropped. GrowthScale issued a terse press release announcing the termination of the Dataflex acquisition agreement, citing discovery of material misrepresentations in the target company's financial statements. The $210 million escrow was returned to GrowthScale, exactly as the contract stipulated in cases of fraudulent representation. The fallout was swift and severe. GrowthScale's stock had already dropped 28% since the earnings call, and fell another 15% on news of the terminated acquisition. Shareholder lawsuits were filed against the board, and executive team alleging they had knowingly pursued an acquisition based on fraudulent financials. A month after my firing, the first executive resignation was announced. Stephanie Mills stepped down as VP of Finance to pursue other opportunities, according to the press release. 2 weeks later, Thomas Wright followed suit. Richard Bennett initially resisted, but after major institutional investors demanded leadership changes, he too announced his departure. Throughout this period, I experienced a roller coaster of emotions. Vindication, yes, but also grief. Despite everything I had believed in GrowthScale's mission and had invested years of my life in the company, watching its reputation and value crumble brought me no joy, only a profound sadness for what might have been if leadership had prioritized integrity over expediency. The personal toll was significant as well. I struggled with anxiety and insomnia, replaying the confrontation in the earnings call over and over in my mind. Justin convinced me to start seeing a therapist who helped me process the trauma of public humiliation and the stress of becoming an involuntary public figure in the business world. You did what your conscience required. My therapist reminded me during a particularly difficult session. The consequences weren't your doing, but the natural result of others' actions. Gradually, I began to heal. Connecting with former colleagues who reached out to express support helped tremendously. Rachel organized a dinner with several team members who wanted to let me know they admired what I had done despite the chaos that followed. Janet's gone too, you know, Rachel told me over dinner. Resigned the same day as Thomas. Word is, she knew exactly what was happening but chose to protect herself, rather than stand up. 3 months after the earnings call incident, I received an unexpected call from Lawrence Parker. April, I'm calling with a proposition. Montgomery Financial is expanding our forensic accounting division, focusing on corporate compliance and fraud prevention. We need someone with both technical expertise and demonstrated ethical courage to help lead the initiative. Would you be interested in discussing a role with us? The offer caught me completely off guard. Lawrence, that's incredibly generous, but won't hiring me be controversial? I'm still the person who blew up a $210 million deal. Precisely why we want you, Lawrence replied. Our clients need to know we take fraud prevention seriously. You've proven you'll stand by your principles even when it costs you personally. That's exactly the reputation we want to build. After careful consideration and discussions with Justin, I accepted the position. The irony wasn't lost on me. The very action that ended my career at Growth Scale had opened a door to a role where my experiences would be valued rather than suppressed. My new position allowed me to channel my experiences into something constructive. I developed training programs for compliance officers facing ethical dilemmas. I consulted with companies wanting to strengthen their internal controls and create cultures where raising concerns was encouraged rather than punished. I even participated in drafting proposed regulations to strengthen whistleblower protections in the financial industry. A year after the fateful earnings call, I was invited to speak at a corporate governance conference. Standing at the podium, looking out at hundreds of compliance professionals, board members, and executives, I felt a sense of purpose that had been missing during those dark days immediately after my firing. Compliance isn't just about rules and regulations, I told the audience. It's about creating an ethical framework that protects not just the company, but everyone who depends on that company's integrity: employees, investors, customers, and the public. When we sacrifice integrity for short-term gains, we ultimately sacrifice everything of real value. After the conference, a young woman approached me. I just started as a compliance analyst at a financial services firm, she said. Your story is what inspired me to choose this career path. I wanted to thank you for showing that one person really can make a difference. Her words touched me deeply. Perhaps that was the greatest resolution of all the turmoil I'd experienced standing up to Growth Scale's leadership. Not the vindication when the acquisition was canceled. Not the satisfaction of seeing those responsible face consequences, but knowing that my actions might inspire others to have the courage to do what's right, even when it's difficult. Today I lead Montgomery Financial's corporate ethics division, working with companies committed to building cultures of transparency and integrity. I still think about those final moments in the Growth Scale conference room, sometimes the fear and uncertainty I felt standing up to powerful executives who thought they could simply discard me. But I've never once regretted sending that email with the attachment that changed everything. If there's one thing I've learned from this journey, it's that our integrity is the one thing that truly belongs to us. Jobs come and go. Companies rise and fall. But our willingness to stand by our principles defines who we are, in ways that no professional title or salary ever could. Have you ever faced a moment where standing up for what's right could cost you something valuable? Would you have the courage to send that email knowing it might end your career, but prevent something worse? Leave a comment below sharing your thoughts or experiences with ethical dilemmas at work. And if this story resonated with you, please like and subscribe to hear more stories about finding strength in difficult situations. Thank you for listening to my story, and remember, sometimes losing your job can lead to finding your true purpose.